to our faith. And I got to the first one, and it's like the first quality that we're supposed to have is, being morally excellent, being virtuous, and what it is to be good. And it's a simple, we're just supposed to be good. So you put application to it, and then what do you do? So I was talking about application. And as soon as you start talking about application, it becomes controversial. So I was talking about the moral dilemma, the trolley dilemma. Which is it better? Is it to let 5 people die or kill 1? What do you do in that circumstance? Or Peter Singer's thesis that he wrote, is it morally wrong to not save a life and not give to the poor? Are you evil? And so, answering those questions, I rolled into, Mary, and how and what she's doing when she washes or anoints Jesus' feet. And what is morally good, and how are we supposed to operate in this world, which moves us into a social justice question. It's like when Jesus said, you always have the poor with you. What do you do there? It's like, they'll always be there, so don't worry about it. It's like, what do we do when we live in our lives, and how do we act morally by what God has given us to do? It becomes a question, and I thought we'd look at a verse-by-verse study of Mark chapter 14 this morning. If you open up your Bibles there, we'll be looking at the first 8 verses, kind of developing a platform that rolls into a harder question because now we're coming up on voting season. And it's like, how do you vote? Do you vote to give more money to the poor, or is that the church's responsibility? Jesus said. And so we're building a platform on what Jesus' conversations are and what's taking place in Mark chapter 14, verse 1. If you're there. It said, it's recorded, it was now 2 days before the Passover, the feast of unleavened bread. And so this places us 2 days prior to the most important event that the world would ever see. That Jesus is going to be handed over for crucifixion. Now Jesus has already been in Bethany for 4 days already, so where does that put us? We're 2 days before the crucifixion. This is where our story picks up. He is now at Simon the leper's house. And we really don't know much about Simon the leper. Lots of Simons there sitting at that table that evening. You can make an assumption and imagine Simon Peter sitting there at the table, along with Simon the Zealot, which is another one of Jesus' disciples. You're like, how do you know they're there? Well, you can make that assumption that Judas Iscariot and his apostles were there, so it might be an accurate assumption to make that. But here we are. We're sitting at the table with Jesus. And I don't know, there's a lot of Simons there. They didn't have baby name books back then, so everyone seems to either be named Simon or Mary in the Bible. And so Simon emerges as only here a brief moment, but a dramatic scene, where he gives everyone in the room a super contagious disease known as leprosy. No, I'm kidding. It's a good assumption. He wasn't leprous at this point. There are strict rules about that, but you can see that Jesus had the habit of healing people, quite possibly what led them to be over at Simon's house to begin with. Now, he is currently there. It is late in the evening. It is most likely evening time. That word there is either afternoon or evening, and that's what they're doing is they are having a meal. Now, I want you to picture that scene. Everyone's just kind of relaxing at the table. Now, we know and we remember important events. Usually how we remember those is doing a selfie, or maybe you're just recording the event for history's sake. But it was probably more like this. And so everyone is enjoying the company of Jesus. Lazarus, who Jesus just raised from the dead just recently, is also there. And I'm sure that is a topic of conversation. Remember, they're in Bethany. Now, Bethany is a small town about 2 miles outside of Jerusalem where both Mary and Martha live. And they are not missing this dinner. I don't know if they just invited themselves over to Simon's house or if they were part of Jesus' entourage. But I know this is going to sound bad, but I don't think I would invite Jesus over to my house if I was back then. Because it's not Jesus that you have to worry about. It is the hordes of people that usually randomly just show up. They're going to blow up my septic tank. It's going to be a nightmare. We all know you may not have a roof when that's all over. You know that story. You have a lot of people that just show up, and in fact, the landman couldn't get in through the door like a normal person because it was blocked with people. Now, I don't know, maybe I'd invite him over to Jim's house. Like, he has a big backyard. Now, what makes you have to wonder is how many people are they going to cram into this house, or Simon's house? Because because word got out that Lazarus was there. And it wasn't just because Jesus was there, but they wanted to see that event. Is he really alive? Now, this might quite possibly be where the phrase keeps living proof comes from, because we need to see it for ourselves. Lazarus was living proof of who Jesus was. So Martha comes out and she's serving food, which seems to be her normal practice. This is what she does. And so I'm sure by this point she has fine-tuned the balance between work and worship. Because we all remember the last law when she demanded that Jesus do something about her lazy sister. And this whole late afternoon, early evening, this scene unfolds in a time of realization. They're sitting by the table enjoying Jesus' company, spending time with close friends. Now, this is all before the crowds start to relocate him. It seems like Jesus is always on the move, trying to find some personal time. He's always constantly bombarded by the crowds. And we all have these moments in our life when we just need to take a step back and recenter ourselves. Usually that's with the people we love. And that actually defines our purpose in life as the people that we're connected to. Jesus' thoughts at this point are really starting to be centered on what is coming. Everyone knows the elephant in the room, and no one is willing to accept that Jesus is going to his death. And if you remember, before they even got to Bethany, what that situation was, they're out past the Jordan. What got them here in the first place? Well, they were out past where John was baptizing, and this is where where John and Andrew first met Jesus. They're in that same area, right before they came into Bethany. Now imagine being there with the disciples at that time, and they're out past the Jordan, and they receive a messenger. And Jesus just got the news that would turn their path towards Jerusalem. It was Mary's words that were used as a tool to drag Jesus to the cross. And everyone knew what this meant. What they were going to face when they would go, if they see you there again, we all know what's going to happen. Jesus wasn't hiding anymore. He was going to ride that donkey right into Jerusalem. Thomas says what everyone was thinking at that time, well, let's all go and die with him. That's a positive note to end on. And Mark wants us to see that scene as it opens up in Mark chapter 14, verse 1, that the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to seize him by stealth and to kill him. Jesus is clearly communicated by this point at least 3 times in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark about the predictions that he was going to die. It was clear to his apostles what was going to happen. John even gives more predictions than what we find in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark and Luke. And you're going to ask yourself, why did they fully believe it? Like, he told them plainly. Well, how could they believe it? They have seen real power that can only come from God. That he claimed to be God. Everything they know about God from history and his people is how God conquered nations. How he brought physical deliverance. And they all know that God can't die. Well, that's how you can't believe it when it's being told to you. In Mark chapter 14, verse 8, he tells them in just a few minutes that this will happen again. That this will be a constant reoccurrence in Jesus' life where he brings this up towards the end of his ministry. Now, John really brings this out, which was brought out in this morning's class, on why Jesus keeps doing this. It was so that when it does take place, that they would all believe. Both Matthew and Mark record what happens next. As this group is relaxing at the table, most likely enjoying a light conversation in each other's company, a woman walks in and walks up to Jesus where he is sitting. Now, in this storyline, there could be lots of reasons why Matthew and Mark don't go into details about who this woman is. You know, maybe she had a head covering on. That was a typical practice at that time. They didn't recognize her. Or Ellicott's commentary actually suggests that Matthew and Mark just didn't know who she was. Right. Because they were just sitting next to this strange woman who's in front of Jesus, front and center, and when they're at Martha's house. And they're all, oh, we got to go If you're coming into that much contact with people, I'm going to tell you, I totally get it. When I preach in places, and everyone knows who you are, and you're like, yeah, hey, you. It's a lot of people to remember. Now, maybe it's true. Matthew and Mark just didn't get the formal meet and greet on who Mary was. Or maybe Matthew and Mark never introduced this woman because of their personal account. That wasn't their focus. Remember, John is the only one who records Lazarus' death and the details surrounding that event. The purpose in writing is different. Matthew and Mark are trying to cram 3 years of Jesus' ministry into a really short book, and that's not their focus in telling the story. They're trying to draw out the key factors of what's taking place. But we really don't know why Matthew and Mark don't mention her name. We do know in reading John that this woman who approaches Jesus at the table is Mary of Bethany. If you jump online, you get all kinds of answers to this question. It's Mary Magdalene. It's where are you getting all this? If you know the account, you're going to know exactly who's being talked about. And she has this container, this vase. The word implies, the Greek word there is implied it had a box shape to it. These containers were used to carry perfumed oils that were expensive, or maybe not expensive. They just didn't want the fragrance escaping, and to keep it pure and intact. This is a unique vessel that contains this expensive ointment, or this perfume, and most commentators agree that it was either sealed permanently with wax or possibly with stone. As Mary walked up to Jesus, I don't think anyone expected what was going to happen next. Mark records that she shatters the container and pours the entire contents on Jesus' head. At this point, I don't really think anyone knew what had happened until the smell reached their noses. And John says the entire house reeked of this fragrance. I had to walk to Macy's department store the other day, going through the mall and going to Dick's Sporting Goods. And there's always some older lady spraying perfume on as you walk by. It fills the entire area. I walk out smelling like a lady. If we think about what's taking place here, it is a lot of liquid being poured on Jesus. John actually records exactly how much that was. It was a pint, about 12 ounces of liquid. Now, it was just about 12 ounces. Now, that's a typical soda can, if you think about that. That was expensive. It almost cost as much as Nar. So that's about how much was dumped on Jesus. I want you to think about that. How much? Now, this was spikenard, which is extracted from the root of the Indian plant that grows in the Himalayan mountains. And its defined value is what is known today as the gold standard. It's what defined value. It was like driving a Porsche of perfumes. Judas gives us the approximate value of what that perfume was. It was right about 300 denarii. Now, a denarii was a silver coin, which is equivalent to a day's worth of wages. Now, I am sure if Rome had a governor like ours, fast food workers would be getting 2 denarii a day. 300 denarii was about a year's worth of salary. Removing weekends and holidays, it's hard to imagine. You would have to say that this is probably about maybe $70,000 today. And if you think about what $70,000, you probably wouldn't take the cap off of that. Now, if you were dumping that at Jesus' head, watching that event unfolding, you're just pouring that out, and you're like, wow, there's $20,000, $50,000, $30,000, $75,000 gone. Just like that. No down payment for a brand new house. You're not buying that new car you were saving for. That big chunk of retirement is, well, now down the drain with the next shower. Gone in a few seconds. This is what makes Mary and what she does here so incredible. This is why Jesus said, whenever the gospel is preached, throughout the whole world to the end of time, what she did would be explained and retold as the gospel story. Out of all the acts that were done for Jesus, this one moved him so deeply that he memorialized it forever. So then I They come in different shapes and sizes, sealed within our jar all the things that are important to us. All our treasures, our earthly possessions. And I see Mary not looking back, totally surrendering herself to Jesus. Everything she did that she held of value was worth nothing compared to Jesus. Imagine the silence in the room as that lid was shattered. She had no intention of measuring out a few ounces and then placing the cap back on. And so much of life is spent preserving and conserving what we hold in our alabaster jar. If we look at our life seriously, you can actually see what's important to you. What you place value in, where you spend your time. Ultimately, if you're thinking about what a good servant is that serves Christ, it's really not a matter of wise money management or even responsible giving. But true love is about extravagant usage of your time and resources to serve your Creator. Everything is centered on Him and His purpose. Mary's gift is totally this unique possession that she could possibly never have afforded on her own, that probably wouldn't be replaced once it was used up. Was it a family heirloom that had been passed down to her, or maybe it was a dowry for marriage? Maybe the money came from Lazarus when he died, right? He was technically dead for 4 days. Let's just sell up all of the stuff, and then we're going to have this money. We'll put it into like an investment that would hold value. And then he came back to life and wouldn't do it. But I believe this is how the series The Chosen actually took this liberty and explained how they came into possession of this. And some people believe that this family, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, either came for money or were just successful hard workers in life. Like, we're first introduced to Mary and Martha in Luke chapter 10. Mary had to own her own home, indicating that she was a woman of means, and the frequency of her hosting dinners. That's expensive, buying food for everybody. And the expensive perfume that her sister owned. So you might come to the conclusion that they had money. But we don't really know for certain how she acquired this quantity of expensive perfume. We should love diving into these characters in the Bible and want to know more. We saw that as Daniel was elaborating on some stories, and he's like, yeah, she was divorced. Like, well, how else do you come to that conclusion? Well, I went back because we love diving into the characters and the reasons why things are happening. I went back when we first met Mary and Martha, and Jesus and his disciples were traveling along, and they entered into a village. And it always surprises me that when the writers don't tell us any real story details, that I feel like I need to know. Like, we don't see Martha ever inviting them over for dinner. They just show up. They're there. Like, we don't hear the doorbell ring as Martha runs to the door to greet Jesus' entourage. We don't get to see how she sees that many people in the house. Like, we're not told what kind of meal they had. We don't know if Mary's older or younger. Instead, it's like we're watching a movie, and Luke zooms in on Mary who's sitting at Jesus' feet. Where did she come from? What was she doing before she sat at Jesus' feet? What's the topic being discussed? Were they talking about politics, heaven, the kingdom? Healing signs and wonders that he was doing? How to obtain eternal life? But now stop and think about what the inspired writer is doing. He wants us to see Mary sitting at Jesus' feet. This is the most important picture for us to see. This is why the writers bring it out. Martha is not the center of conversation, even though when we talk about the story, that's all we talk about. The disciples are not more important in this event. The room, the food, the decorations on the wall are not the topic of the conversation. This is a snapshot of Mary sitting at Jesus' feet. The Holy Spirit's camera has blurred the background of everything else. He only wants us to see Mary sitting at Jesus' feet. The contrast was Martha, who's running around busy with life, confused priorities, And now we fast forward, and where's Mary? She's at Jesus' feet. John records the details of this event that Matthew and Mark don't focus on, which is kind of weird, because you seem to have a different story being told. By the time John actually picks this event up, Mary has moved to the feet of Jesus, and I just picture that room has been gone completely silent. I wonder if Lazarus and Martha knew beforehand that their sister was going to make this dramatic public display of humiliation and self-sacrifice. Was there a conversation prior to that? By this point, she had already poured out all, or not some of the contents on Jesus' head. The distinctive aroma clinging to the hair and skin of Jesus, and no doubt, the quantity being used here would have lasted several days. Is that powerful? Her extravagant gift was a picture of this kind of offering that's expected of each of us when we give back to our Creator. It's not, we always tend to think of that as money, but it's the time that we spend in what we do. Only the best was acceptable for her Lord, and she was willing to give everything as an act of worship. This has always been how God wants us to serve. From the very beginning, if you jump back into Numbers, you're going to see the same thing that you see in the New Testament, that out of all of your gifts you shall present the best of them. This is really the statement that Jesus made to the lawyer. If you break everything down in your life, the reason why every decision is made, every dollar you spend, all the time that you use, the best of it is given to Him. To service His kingdom. We are His hands. Nothing is withheld, nothing is more important, and nothing but Him controls your actions and your thoughts. And this is where we are seeing, and what we're seeing from Mary at Jesus' feet. I don't really know what that looked like. If she poured the entire contents out of the basin and it was running down his head, as Matthew and Mark pick up, that she anointed his head. And it was running down his entire body, and it reached his feet. The 12 ounces, again, is a lot of fluid. That could absolutely have happened. Or if she's now there on her hands and knees, and what is left from the bottle, she pours out on Jesus' feet. And this is where actions become more than just an extravagant gift. You would typically miss this if you do not know Jewish tradition. You don't let your hair down for any reason in public. This is during a time in history where women covered their heads with scarves and veils. Unraveling a woman's hair was considered an act of humiliation and punishment. This was done when a woman was suspected of adultery. I have numbers up here. This is how you determine if a woman was unfaithful. Paul wrote to the Corinthians about this as well. It was considered disgraceful to let your hair down. I was reading all kinds of comments online. They're talking about this as a sexual thing. It's not. It was considered inappropriate and not respectable. This picture this scene as it unfolds. As Mary is on the floor of Simon's house, she reaches up to untie her long hair, gathering it in her hands, and wiping the excess perfume off of Jesus' feet. And I don't think it would be kind of weird. Like, this would have been more like smearing it in. Hair is not absorbent. It's not useful for wiping anything. It's like, where's Peter? He normally speaks up at this time. Like, you need a towel? He always throws in his 2 cents for everything. Like, I don't know. Like, what might work better in this situation? But it wasn't to dry his feet. It was about what the action represented. This was a deeply intimate, self-exposing act, putting herself in a position of lowliness. Mary's behavior was uninhibited worship. It's complete submission to Christ. Most people view feet as a disgusting part of the body, especially during the time of the sandal. Everyone walked around and their feet were pretty nasty. closed-toed shoes had not been invented yet, and you weren't able to wash them as often as, say, your hands. And so no one liked washing feet. In fact, Jesus made that comment multiple times. No one washed my feet. In fact, when he was washing all his apostles' feet, no one offered to wash his feet to begin with when they walked in, which was normally a custom. It was probably up there with cleaning the toilet. I don't think Mary was looking at Jesus' feet coming out of the back room, ready to apply the perfume to him, thinking, maybe tomorrow might be a better day to do this. And Jesus, what did you step in? She wasn't reasoning with herself that, man, if I get something in my hair, I'll have to cut it off. Or maybe Martha would have a conversation prior that I'm going to be headed straight to the shower after this. These thoughts were not on her mind. She wanted to show her sacrificial love by doing this selfless act. I want us to consider what hair was to women of that time. This is something that God gave to women as something special. Paul described it here as their covering for their glory. Even today, I know how long it takes to brush a teenage girl's hair. It's hours. The time it takes to wash it, condition it, all the great lengths it takes to keep it clean, smelling good. It was something important to Mary. You see, Mary wasn't alone with Jesus. This wasn't an act between two people. His disciples were in the room. Lazarus, Martha, Simon the leper. She knew that they would be watching this act unfold, opening her up to serious ridicule. And this action goes against their customs completely. And she does it anyway. And there's a fine line between humility and humiliation. I think Mary found it. I don't think anyone was going to mention how this went against their traditions, because Jesus already came into that event at a separate time. Earlier on in the Gospels of Luke, during the beginning part of Jesus' ministry, a prostitute does the same thing and washes Jesus' feet. Separate event. And the Pharisee that asked him at dinner was like, if you knew who this woman was, you wouldn't allow her to touch feet. Jesus goes off into this whole parable after that comment about who loves him more. You didn't wash my feet. His disciples aren't going to bring up that violation because they knew probably how it was going to be addressed. Similarly, you're going to get another analogy. But his disciples aren't going to let this go. There's a lot of money being used like this. Matthew records his disciples were indignant when they saw this. And they said, why the waste? Can't you just give Jesus a hug and tell him how much you love him? And then, we can use the money to go for a greater cause. I loved how she didn't care. She wasn't worried about what anyone else thought or said. It's funny because she never defends herself. When in the account of Matthew or Mark, she doesn't respond. Her entire focus was on Jesus and her love. How do you not respond when accusations are flying? When you're in the right and you're doing your work of service, and someone always brings up, well, you're not doing that right, or you're insincere, or like that came up a couple of times about my shoes and what I wear on my clothes. If you're able to defend yourself accurately, well then you can justify what you're doing. But Mary doesn't do that. She doesn't defend her actions. Think about how much you try to justify yourself in the eyes of others who criticize or mock you because you're doing something in service to your Creator. We act like Mary, sitting at the feet of Jesus, listening to him is our priority. To have her depth of understanding, her passion for Christ, and her complete faith in his plan for her life and how that was going to live. I love how Isaiah describes probably how Mary felt How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who bring forth good tidings, that publish peace, that bring good tidings of good, that publish salvation, that says unto Zion, thy God reigns. The gift that Mary brought is most likely her valuable treasure in the entire world. Jesus taught this principle. He said, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. It's like where your mind is, where it sits, what you think about, what you do, where you spend your time, is what you love. Mary loved Jesus so deeply it reflected on how she gave. This event would kickstart the reason why God set foot on earth. He told everyone in the room how he understood what had just happened. He says, when she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Now, I don't know if Mary fully understood the significance of anointing Jesus, but I do know she had come to appreciate Christ's work. It was more than anything that she could ever come to know or even act on. James tells us, without works, your faith is dead. Jesus tells us, if you love me, if you really love me, you will keep my commandments. Why do you show up for services? Because you have to, or because you want to? We always try to look to justify commands on why we do the things we do. But the real answer is because I love God with all of my heart, soul, and mind. I do the things that I do because there is nothing more important to me. To have a relationship with Christ, to live for him, to be a part of the same. You have to follow him with all of your heart, soul, and mind. If you have a need this morning to respond to the gospel, you can come forward now. We stand.